make it as easy on that foot soldier as we possibly can before we go. Yes, sir.
Is there any evidence of any members of the Supreme Assembly or any Kurds or any other perhaps uninvited participants in the war effort?
Not to my knowledge, Dave.
No, I haven't. I have no evidence that would support that.
Captain Harrington, you and General Kelly and others have talked about how that the Iraqis are very good at deception, that they paint fake damage on tanks, set off smoke pods to make it look like... Is there any way that after the fact you can look back and say, oh, that was a decoy that we killed, not a tank?
Yeah, we can.
Can you elaborate a little bit?
Yes,
on that?
but let me make a statement here. I think the amount of deception that we're seeing is not a significant amount. In other words, the damage that we're inflicting on these decoys is not, in the relative overall macro scheme of things, is just not a significant amount of damage that's being done, or a detractor from our ability to make an assessment in this regard.
Can you follow up a bit on how you can tell whether what you did was against a real target or a fake one?
We wouldn't want to tell you how we would do that because that would help the other side, but we do have an adequate capability to discriminate between real targets and decoys. Not to say that decoys haven't been attacked. I am certain that they have, but as Dave mentioned, Captain Harrington, it has not been a significant part of our effort. Yes, sir.
General, can we revisit the point that you and the captain made earlier about the number of Iraqis who have left their units but haven't necessarily crossed over the lines into Saudi Arabia? Does this appear to be individual acts? Has there been any action by groups of people? And two, can you give us a feel for what kind of success Baghdad is having with these two renewed calls of a draft of 17 and 18-year-olds?
Well, Dan, you're talking about the ones coming south towards us. Does it seem to be an organized thing or disorganized?
Well, I'm talking about those and the individuals you say who have left their units but apparently are trapped behind their own line.
Yeah, we know very little about them, so it's difficult for me to address that. Are major units defecting, I think, is what's behind your question. I don't know of any major units, let's define that as a battalion or higher, that have defected en masse. But I think a lot of units have lost people, both north and south. Don't know what the numbers are in the north. We know generally what's coming to the south are individuals. There might be 5, 10, 15, or 20 from the same battalion, but it doesn't look like a chain of command operation where they came marching out together.
General?
Yes, sir.
General, the body count of the Scud tells is a bit confusing. From the figures that were made available for us at the beginning of the fighting, it seems that all of them are destroyed now, both in West and South Iraq. How can you tell that you have destroyed a Scud tail?
Oh, we can tell when we destroy one. Incidentally, we don't have a Scud tail body count because we don't use body counts anymore. Our problem is not in their destruction. Our problem, he has the indigenous capability to make what we call MELs, mobile erector launchers, that are on trailers. He has made them in Iraq. There's only a certain number he got in the Soviet Union, which we call TELs. We can be fairly sure of what it is that we have destroyed. What we can't be sure of is how many he has left, or is he making them, because it's not, it's not a big technological thing. He can make them pretty easy. Dave, do you want to add to that?
Well, as the General stated, with getting your hands around the number that he may have is a difficult process. We have some pretty good evidence that lets us know specifically when we believe we found a mobile Scud and we've engaged it, and we have a secondary explosion or detonation. We can measure that. So we have a pretty good idea about how many we've really engaged, how many we've destroyed, and the uncertainty in this entire equation is how many more does he have. They're really a tough target, as you can well imagine. They're small, they can move around, they can hide. And we've got, I believe, a very elegant and impressive effort going after those Scuds now, which has resulted in a decreased number of launches.
Thank you. A follow-up question. Do they produce the Scud tails now, which means are they reproducing or repairing Scud tails?
First, they don't produce Scud tails at all. The tail, the transporter, erector, launcher, and integrated system was produced in the Soviet Union and sold to Iraq, obviously, before this war. We have given a different name to another thing that they do make indigenously called a MEL, a mobile erector launcher. We think in terms of acronyms. How many of them they've made, I can't tell you because they're fairly simple to make. It's just a great big trailer with a superstructure erected on it on which they can place a Scud.
General?
Yes, ma'am.
What could you tell us about the Iraqi prisoner of war who has said that he had seen 2 American prisoners of war taken to Basra and points beyond, and what would be your reaction to that?
I've heard the same story you have, but I don't know it for a fact. We are still carrying those 2 individuals, I think you mean 2 soldiers, male and female, who are missing. We're still carrying them as missing because we don't have any hard information, and the Iraqis have elected not to comply with the Geneva Conventions and notify the International Red Cross so that we can be notified as to what their status is. So we just don't know where they are.
You don't have an Iraqi prisoner of war giving you information about them?
An Iraqi prisoner of war would be in the hands of the Saudi Arabians, and they would be interrogating that individual. Yes, sir.
So about the
Right behind you.
General, you've been telling us in the past few days that you have an assessment that Iraqi capabilities of combat have been degraded. But could you tell us today that how much Saddam Hussein thinks he can sustain the fighting with Allied forces?
Of course, that's a judgment that Mr. Hussein will have to make. I'm not certain that Saddam Hussein knows how much he has been degraded, because I'm not sure in the rigid structure that is the Iraqi army that everybody's telling the truth going back up the line. I think there might be a tendency to put a rosy gloss on it. I think I mentioned once before, some British lord once said that dictators always look good up till the last 10 minutes. And sometimes there can be a dry rot occurring within a military organization that doesn't become apparent till later on. I think that might be true with a lot of armies that work for dictators. Yes, sir.
It's about the tank situation. Do you have an assessment, can you tell us vaguely about the fuel situation of the Iraqis? I mean, if the tanks come out, how far could they go now?
That's, of course, very hard to say. They're not refining any more fuel. They have fuel in theater. They have elected to take the large barrels off the back of the tanks that contain additional fuel, which cuts, and this is based on my memory, it may not be correct, but I believe it cuts their range down from 600 and some kilometers to 400 and some kilometers. Their capability to move fuel up to those tanks is seriously degraded because bridges are out, because we've hit their ammunition depots and their fuel storage depots. So I think they'd have difficulty, but being able to actually say a tank could only operate for 1,500 kilometers or 500 kilometers would be pretty tough.
John, why don't you take the last one?
You've talked in the past about damage to Iraqi infrastructure targets, the electrical generating capacity, communications, bridges. You just mentioned POL. Can you bring us up to date on where that stands? And I have a follow after that.
What we have done in attacking strategic targets is to try to take away his capability to produce things that assist in his war effort. I would say at this stage of the game, except for the communications, and they continue to come up with workarounds for the communications, and while it's not good, it's still probably adequate. They're in very, very bad shape now. Actually quantifying that and putting a number on it is difficult for me to do, but they are not producing repair parts. There is very, very, very little NBC production going on in that country. It ranges from 0 to maybe 10% of what they had before the war. Their ability to move things, and I'm talking about supplies to re-equip or repair their forces, is seriously degraded. The Commander-in-Chief over there, General Schwarzkopf, said about 90%. So that's about where we stand on those strategic
You
targets.
mentioned before, however, a week or 10 days ago that 25 to 50%, I think was the figure, of the nation's electrical generating capacity had been knocked out. Do you continue to knock out the electrical grid now, and what percentage of the country essentially is without electricity?
Do you have a number on the electrical?
Well, it's kind of a combination of our strikes and his desire to turn off electricity. There's not a lot of electricity. There's not a lot of a capability to make refined products to support his military infrastructure. By and large, it's exactly as the general said. The country is just about turned off in its ability to produce things that will support his war machine.
Well, as you know, President Gorbachev of the Soviet Union has said the United States, or suggested the United States has gone well beyond the aims spelled out in the UN resolution, and is now, in fact, doing considerable damage to the civilian population of Iraq, and the electrical grid, the water system would be evidence of that. How do you distinguish between what is damaging his military and what is also moving on and ruining the civilian?
What we are damaging are those things that have the capability to make his army stronger. If there is an additional effect on the civilian population, it's one that Saddam Hussein has chosen, not one that we have. Yes, ma'am.
With regard to the fleeing Iraqi planes, a couple of them were apparently defectors. Do you know what proportion of the pilots are defecting? And have you anything more on the story about the attempted bombing of the palace?
Just what the second part first, just what the Commander General Schwarzkopf said the other night. In terms of which of them are defectors, which are not, I don't know, because we don't have open relations with Iran, and Iran has taken and I understand sequestered those pilots, but that's about all I know.
General, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Let's see, I just have a, go ahead. Those of you who need to leave and file, I understand. Don't have anything further for you except to, there's some interest in these reserve numbers, so I'll read them through very quickly. Total number of guard and reservists on active duty, now 220,348. By service, that's Army 149,154. Navy 18,417, Air Force 27,402, Marine Corps 24,575, and Coast Guard is an even 800. Anything else, Emil?
Yeah, Pete, there's a report, as you know, there in the Senate as well as the House, there's legislation which was introduced by Senator Hines and Representative Boxer to deal with this issue about having one parent come back or having a single parent, a mother, exempt from military service. I know that the Pentagon has come out against this legislation, but do you see any leeway in light of all these stories coming out now of hardship cases in this situation?
Well, let's talk about reservists and guardsmen first. In the call-up authority that we've used, the services, the military departments, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, and Coast Guard have been very clear from the beginning, since late August when we first started to call up reservists to active duty for what was then Operation Desert Shield. Very clear in saying that they would consider hardship cases and just the sort of things that you spelled out. So I would argue, number one, that we're already doing this with reservists who were called up. Second thing is, as a general overall policy for those service members on active duty, this cuts both ways. I remember when we were visiting one of the hospital ships in the Persian Gulf, there were many people there who hoped that we would allow married service members, both of whom might be eligible to work on a hospital ship, to work there together. So it's not as simple as it may seem. I would say that as a general matter, we oppose a change in the policy or a legislative change in policy. I think that's having the legislature do it, the Congress in this case, is the worst way to manage the Defense Department. Having said that, however, the military departments do try to have some flexibility. Mark?
Pete, last fall, you said that you're going to put rotation policy on the shelf. And you said then that you would not really have to worry about that until February, the 6-month point. Now that February is here and it appears the air war will continue, are there any plans, not major units, but are there any plans to think in the works about rotating smaller units or ships or hardware in and out of the Gulf region?
Remember the reason, well, the simple answer to your question is no. And remember the reason why we said that February was a problem. Because at that time, we could only keep service members on duty for 90 days plus 90 days in the case of most service members, and then the 180 plus 180 for some of the others. That's not a problem anymore because now we've gone to the next level of presidential authority, the so-called ready reserve call-up. So that clock isn't ticking anymore. Everybody who was a reservist who is now on active duty in the Persian Gulf is there under the new level of presidential authority, the presidential ready reserve call-up authority. So there is no clock ticking anymore. There's no reason to make a decision by mid-February. So the need that I cited back in August was under the old call-up authority. We don't have the time limitations now. I think the Secretary said over the weekend when he was in the Persian Gulf that we're basically not going to look at rotation policy now until this operation is over. We need all the people there that we can have.
Yeah. We've seen television pictures of major bridges in Baghdad being blown up. Would that comment in any sense come under the definition of targets which have the capability to make Iraq's army stronger?
Absolutely. And here's the reason why. You have to get supplies to your military in the Kuwaiti theater of operations. You got 500,000 plus 540,000 troops sitting there. They have to eat. They need fuel. They need ammunition. They need all the kind of supplies that people need. They get those supplies by using trucks. They have to cross rivers. They have to cross unnavigable land masses. They have to use bridges. So you take those bridges out, you deprive them of supplies. That's a very simple military concept.
So any bridge anywhere in Iraq is a potential route?
No, certainly not. Some bridge leading off in some direction where there aren't any troops wouldn't be a military target. Though we have been watching the traffic patterns. We know what bridges the trucks use to carry military equipment and supplies. It's a very simple matter to watch that kind of pattern, and we've been doing that for weeks and months before Operation Desert Storm began. So we know which bridges are important, and when they do workarounds, we can watch that happen, and we can go around go after the workarounds. Bob?
The meetings tomorrow morning, Secretary Cheney with the British and French defense ministers.
Yes.
Is that to discuss the timing of a ground war, or the nature of the continuing air war? What?
First of all, the meeting with the French minister, of course, Jean-Pierre Chevènement, his predecessor, resigned earlier, so I would describe it as a get-acquainted meeting largely. The British minister, Tom King, and Sir David Craig make frequent visits to the United States, and they always come over here when they're in town. I don't know of any specific agenda that we have with them. I think we'll discuss the progress of the operation. The British, as you know, have made a substantial commitment to the operation, and we compare notes from time to time. Jim?
Pete, I'm sure while you were in Saudi Arabia, you got an earful on the complaints about the pool system. Can you tell us what complaints you did receive, what your response was, and if you had any additional thoughts on how you might change it?
Well, sure, I'd be happy to. I spent some time in Dhahran with the pool coordinators. Every segment of the news industry that's covering the operation, television, radio, newspapers, news magazines, still photographs, newspapers, and so on, has a pool coordinator for that segment. And I sat down with the pool coordinators in Dhahran. I'd say that their concerns are the ones you would expect. Access, there's 1,100 reporters in Saudi Arabia right now. So there's a question of how many can get out to where people are. That's, I guess, the number one concern. The number two concern is, will we have people in place? If there is the ground phase to the campaign, will we have people in place to be able to see that? That's their main consideration. That's been our main consideration, too, since we formed these pools. I know there's frustration. Everybody would like to be out there where the action is. One of the things that I learned is, as units begin to move, I think, a lot of people who are back here in Washington now were last there in December or January and had a sense in their mind about what was around Dhahran. I know I did, having been there with the Secretary in December. If you wanted to do a story on logistics and you were based in Dhahran, you walked out of the hotel and walked about 7 or 8 minutes over to where General Gus Pagonis's logistics operation was, and you could do a story. That stuff is all moved way far forward, and it's very hard to do that kind of story now. There are great distances in Saudi Arabia, so we have a challenge to try to get stuff back quickly. Some of this stuff is, a long, long drive to get back. So we're trying to speed up that process. We're trying to get more people into the field and making sure that we'll have folks in place if the ground phase does begin. Thelma?
Do you think that the United States is going to be pressing the Saudi Arabian authorities to get more information from the Iraqi POW about the 2 American soldiers who are missing?
Every single one of our prisoners of war, every single one of our missing is a high priority target for us in terms of intelligence collection. And so we want to learn everything we can from all that we can. Keenan, just a few more.
Just very quickly, under the heading of command and control, Iraqi state radio, though clearly it's been damaged, still continues to broadcast. Dom gave a major speech supposedly yesterday. The question, is that radio station a target, or in fact does it help the U.S. and its allies to have that as a conduit for information gathering, to leave it on the air?
It's not part of our operational theory that we should leave their radio stations on the air. And in fact, radio and television transmitting facilities, antennas, transmitters, and relay stations and so forth have been military targets. And we have done a lot to take their radio off the air. One thing is that, as an answer to John Broder's question, General Kelly discussed a moment ago, is there is a real problem in electrical power in Iraq right now. So there are not a lot of people that can hear these broadcasts to start with. So I don't know who he's talking to. But there are some low-power radio and television stations around the country that come on and off the air, so we try to get to those as we can.
But battery, just fun, clearly there are battery-operated radios in Iraq, and he is continuing to broadcast. Does that radio station serve any purpose?
Not to us. Wolf?
What is the Pentagon's policy on releasing information regarding Iraqi civilian casualties? Not if there are casualties, but is there a policy in discussing this issue?
No, it's simply that we can't stand up here and discuss what we don't know. And that's about as elegant as the policy is, that we have no reason not to discuss it. It's just that we don't know very much about it.
If there is a pilot, though, who comes back and said, I made a mistake and dropped a bomb on a civilian area, if that's happened, would that be releasable?
Yes, but again, we would have no way of knowing what the extent of casualties would be. In other words, we have no way of knowing how many people might be affected.
Thank you.
Okay, Bob, thank you.
And that wraps up this latest Pentagon briefing. Spokesman Pete Williams, also some words from Lieutenant General Tom Kelly and Captain David Harrington. Let's turn to our own retired United States Air Force General Perry Smith.